everyone. Oh, really? Want to go do some gardening? Let's do it. Come on. Hey everyone, it's Anna again. We're back in the garden. Today we are going to be planting some seeds for a fall crop. I'm going to grow some beets that have a nice short gardening season, anywhere from 50 to 60 days. And to do that, I need to pull out the crop that I grew this spring, which in this case is snap peas. Now here we are down next to the peas that I'm talking about. I planted these a couple of months ago, and we have gotten so many peas off of these bushes. It's a relatively short section at the end of my raised beds, and I'm going to show you how I do this here. You can see in this raised bed, it's 10 feet long by 4 feet wide. I've got bush beans all through the middle, and on the ends, I put these tall vining things. I do either the peas at the ends or cucumbers, anything that grows really tall. For me, I just find it works really well to put tall vining things at the ends of those raised beds, the last foot or two, and it makes it easy to stake them up and keep them up off the ground and makes it easy for harvesting. Now, these particular snap peas have been incredibly productive. We have gotten so much food out of these vines. It is amazing. And you can tell if you look closely. I mean, here we go. Look at this. You've still got beautiful peas left on the vine. And even though these have really slowed down for the season, they would keep trickling out a last few peas for weeks, maybe another month. But this is homestead math. You know, it's one of those things where I could either leave all of these vines here and get a few more cups of peas out of them over the next month, or I could rip them out today and plant beets and get pounds and pounds of beets out of this same space in another 60 days. And so that's the choice that I'm making. And you know, it's one thing that I think just doesn't get talked about a lot when we talk about fall gardening. It always sounds really romantic and efficient, you know, oh yeah, sneak in a second crop once the first one is done. But the reality of it is, unless you're following, the crop that you're following was something like lettuce, which is completely bolted, or bok choy that you've harvested every last head of it, you know, something like that where you've pulled it out of the ground, you've harvested it, it's gone, and you've got that empty space. With something like peas or maybe even beans that you planted early, chances are you may be faced with that tough choice of, you know that you've gotten the most of the productivity out of these vines, but you worked hard for them, they've treated you well, you've gotten so much food out of these vines, and you're really gonna pull them out when they're still giving you a pea here and there, and you still see a couple blossoms left. Yes, we are going to go ahead and do that because it's the efficient choice for the space and putting away as much food as possible from this garden for our family for the winter. I wanted to bring you with me on this part of the process because it's one that you don't always see, and it can be really difficult to do. And here we're going to just go ahead and, yep, I know it's heartbreaking, and I don't have my videographer with me today, so I'm just holding my phone, but we are ripping these vines out of the ground, and it is sad. It does feel like, oh, there's a couple blossoms left on there. It's tricky to do, but you can do it. And I wanted you to see this part of the process. We're going to go ahead and tear out all of these vines. We'll carefully go through them and make sure that we're taking off all of the peas that we can use and making use of every last pea. And then we'll dig up the soil and get some beet seeds in the ground. All right, let me finish pulling these vines out and we'll plant some beets. All right, we're back. You can tell this space that was filled with all those pea vines earlier is empty now. Here's my pile of pea vines. There's quite a bit there. And here is a bucket of well-rotted compost that I'm going to work into this space. Truthfully, it probably doesn't really need the extra fertility. Peas are not a heavy feeder. They don't really take a huge toll on the soil. But when you're putting a second crop into the soil, it's just never ever a bad idea to go ahead and top it up with a little well-rotted compost. Just give it a little extra boost and make sure that your plants will be off to a good start. So I'm going to dump in this compost, work it in, and we'll plant some beet seeds. Now I'm going to show you one thing that I did allow to stay here is, I don't know if you can see this, this is a volunteer tomato plant. That means I did not plant it, but I did have tomatoes growing in this raised bed last year, and one of the seeds germinated this spring, and now we've got a tomato plant that has blossoms and some little tiny tomatoes on it. I usually don't let my volunteer tomatoes grow because I just end up with so many of them. And really more than I need, and they're not always the greatest, but here and there I'll see a volunteer tomato plant that kind of catches my attention, and I'll let it grow, and if it has absolutely wonderful tomatoes, I'll often save the seeds and kind of have a little project going of saving seeds from these volunteer tomatoes to try to develop, ones that I just really especially like that are a little bit different and grow really well here in Maine. And so we'll see what we get off of this plant, but I did let this volunteer tomato vine stay right at the end. You can tell I've got it staked up a little bit. And it's far enough along that it will set fruit and ripen before we have frost, so I'm not worried about that. And I thought, yeah, we'll let this one stay. Other than that, we've got this raised bed ready. This whole end section where the peas were, we're ready to plant some beets. All right, let's plant some beets. The varieties that I'm putting in this spot, and I'm just going to mix them all together. These are just going to be a small little section of beets that we'll harvest a few at a time for the table. They're not going into storage for the winter. This will just be so that we've got a nice kitchen garden with some great beets to grab at dinner time and put into meals, a few here and a few there throughout the fall. We've got Red Ace, 50 days. Ruby Queen, that's a really nice variety, 60 days. This will take about the longest out of the 4 varieties. Red Cloud, another one I really love, 50 days. And then just that old classic Detroit Dark Red, which you can find just about anywhere, and that's 55 days. And so if you've never planted beet seeds, the interesting thing about beet seeds is it's not really just one seed. These little tiny things, and let's see if you can see these on my hand. They look like a grape nut. If you've ever eaten grape nuts, do they make grape nuts anywhere? I bet they do. And they're about that size. And generally, each seed puts up somewhere between 2 and 4 little seedlings. And so you're going to have to end up thinning these. Really, the only way to get absolutely stunning, perfect beets is to go through and thin them, because you can't let every seedling grow that will come up from each seed. Generally, what they say to do is to plant one seed every 1 to 2 inches and then thin them to 1 every 4 inches. For myself, I just generally tend to go ahead and plant them at that final spacing, which is 4 inches apart. And in a little raised bed section like this, I'm not working with rows, so what I'm going to do is just give them spacing of 4 inches in all directions. If I end up with a seed here or there that doesn't germinate, I'll use one of the thinned seedlings from, again, these are compound seeds. Each one is going to put up 2 or 3 or even 4 seedlings per seed. And when I go through and pull out those extra ones, I can use the extras to fill in any holes that I might have. So I'm just going through, I'll grab a handful from each packet and just put a seed every 4 inches in each direction. And the section that I'm planting here is about 4 feet wide, the full width of the bed, by about 2 feet deep. And so we've got about 8 square feet here that I'm planting in beets. All right, we've got beet seeds in the ground. I'm just smoothing them out. When you're putting beet seeds in the ground, about 1/2 inch deep is the right depth for them. Beets, because they're a root vegetable, they're something you plant maybe just slightly on the deep side compared to the usual rule of thumb. In general, a very, very general rule of thumb is that as whatever the diameter of your seed, you can figure on planting that about 1.5 to 2 times that deep, covered with soil, and that generally works pretty well. For beets, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch, it works great. They're really not picky. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for pulling out my vines. I'm going to go through now and pull off every last pea from those vines and then stuff them into my composter. And that composting, when you're doing a hot compost method, is such a quick process. It's not even going to be a month before those pea vines are back in the garden again as fresh, fully processed compost ready to go. And they'll get put back into the garden somewhere around some plant or another, and it's all a cycle. Nothing gets wasted. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow.